Hey everybody, I just want to give you a few things to think about and a few notes about Marlowe for this learning module, which is devoted to Tudor-Stuart drama. Right? It's classified in a number of ways. Tudor-Stuart drama, drama from the period. Right? One way in which it's classified is Renaissance drama. Another way is early modern drama. So the reason why I shy away from using those terms is because Renaissance is an invention of the 19th century, sort of to look back and assess the drama and also the literature from the period as well. And early modern is another way of looking back, right? We think about modernity, and it's a way for critics who are sort of operating from the standpoint of their idea of modernity and looking back to the period that we're talking about and calling it early modern, right? The time when modern ideas are sort of in their developing stages. And I feel like both are sort of like almost presentist readings, right? Way of, they're sort of projecting values and standards from a present day perspective onto the literature of the past. So I like Tudor Stuart because I think keeping in mind the political structures of the time is really important. So I like that classification because I do think that it sort of grounds it in the period more so than Renaissance and early modern. But we're going to have to talk specifically about Marlowe. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't assign any Shakespeare is because I feel like a lot of you have read a lot of Shakespeare. You're going to read a lot of Shakespeare as you go through your career, or if you haven't already. And I decided to pick Marlowe because Marlowe is very much a trailblazer as far as early modern drama is concerned. He's writing in the Tudor period. He begins writing in the late 1580s and 1590s. And his early plays, the Tamburlaine plays, which are sort of like these long epics about conquest, really changed the game for what drama can do, both subject matter wise, very strong central character who sort of flies in the face of moral, religious, ethical values, right? And is just solely bent on accumulating power and land and conquering land. And linguistically, or from the standpoint of style, right? He takes Surrey's iambic pentameter, which he uses for the Elizabethan or the Tudor Stuart sonnet, right? And he uses that kind of writing in the drama that he writes, as Shakespeare does. Shakespeare also writes an iambic pentameter as well. And another thing that Marlowe does that sort of is very interesting is that he is sort of working from two traditions. One is the Senecan tradition of drama, right? Where Seneca writes versions of, for example, the Medea story and others, right? And from the idea of a very strong central character, a character with an interior life, right? He's not an allegory, right? He's got like sort of a sense of an interior life, and he also has what we call grandiloquence, right? Like he's very much emphasis on the human's ability to speak and to speak well, right, and to speak with conviction and persuasively and on a very grand scale. And Marlowe sort of uses this poetic style that he develops in his drama, where he's likening people to places, and he's very interested in place, and he's very interested in these very grandiose images, and he's also very interested in powerful individuals, which is a significant thing, I think, for Marlowe. Faustus is not original to Marlowe. It's a German sort of folktale, right? However, what's very interesting about Marlowe's version of the tale is that the character of Faustus is incredibly eloquent, incredibly intelligent. He's incredibly ambitious, right? And the reason why he decides to sell his soul to the devil is because he wants to sort of accumulate power. He wants to become powerful. He wants to be known. He wants to be famous, right? So he's sort of, in a sense, Faustus does, he forsakes his immortality in the afterlife for a secular immortality, right? Much in the same way that the poet does, right? And the Renaissance, as we talk about the Renaissance man, is the emphasis as Jacob Burckhardt writes in the 19th century, the emphasis on the individual's potential, right? So Tamburlaine in the Tamburlaine plays is an individual of significant power and strength and capabilities and eloquence, right? And Marlowe's Faustus is to a certain degree as well, right? He is sort of interested, Marlowe, in unbridled individualism. And this unbridled individualism of Faustus leads him, and his desire for power and notoriety leads him to make this devil's bargain, right? So the Renaissance emphasis on the individual, right? The Senecan tradition of drama, right? And also this tradition of drama called the morality play. Now, morality plays consist usually of, fairly bare bones sort of sets and things. But what it's about is good and evil's attempt, and good and evil are represented on stage by characters, like sort of like allegorical figures. Good and evil are represented as trying to sort of fight. They're fighting over the soul of the central character, and they use arguments, they use eloquence, they try to persuade this character to choose good or evil, right? And that process of trying to persuade one way or the other is called psychomachia. And Marlowe depicts psychomachia in the good and evil angel's battle over his soul, right? In the way in which Mephistopheles tries to corrupt him, right? But he adds sort of this interiority that Seneca has, right? And a lot of the battles that occur between good and evil happen inside Faustus, right? They're, at least they're articulated by Faustus as he's sort of exploring the possibilities, right? Another thing that you have to remember about Renaissance or early modern drama is the influence that classical rhetoric and the education in classical rhetoric that they were receiving has, right? And in Roman rhetoric, in even in dialectic of Plato's, like they're asking questions and trying to figure out the answers and thinking through problems and coming up with solutions and weighing two sides of an issue, right? These are rhetorical exercises that Marlowe and Shakespeare and a lot of the dramatists from the period would have engaged in the school. And you see that throughout early modern drama, throughout Tudor Stuart drama, is the way in which a character has an interior life, but really what they're doing, what seems like a natural interior life, is this investigation of moral issues, is this investigation of probabilities, right? Of problems, of possible conclusions and solutions, right? And another thing that you have to think about when thinking about Tudor Stuart drama is that it's become commercialized and popularized, right? The first commercial theater, the Red Lion Theater, the theater, is built in 1576 by the father of Richard Burbage, who was the main actor and main shareholder in Shakespeare's Chamberlain's Men, then King's Men company, right? And the theater is reliant on the nobility more so for royal protection from the local magistrates than for finances, right? The way that they, individuals, investors will invest capital, and the way that they recoup that capital is through sales of tickets, right? And you know the system at the Globe, perhaps you do. Marlowe never performed anything at the Globe because the Globe didn't exist when Marlowe was alive. Marlowe dies in 1593. The Globe isn't founded until 1599, much later, right? A few years later. And penny for the ground in the theater, penny for a seat, penny for a seat with a cushion, right? So you have a popular theater tradition. You have dramatists making their living as dramatists. Not as many of them, most of them did not make the kind of living that Shakespeare made. Shakespeare made most of his living by buying and selling real estate and as a shareholder in the company of the Lord Chamberlains and then the Kingsmen, right? But there are these sort of journeyman playwrights that are making about £5 a play, right? And playwriting is very collaborative in the period. A lot of different people would probably get a plot from somewhere else and put it together themselves and write their own versions. Shakespeare does this a lot. Shakespeare inherits a lot of plays produced by the Queen's Men, and he makes his own versions of them, right? Hamlet was a play that was already performed. Lear was a play that was already performed. Winter's Tale is based on Robert Greene's Pandosto Triumph of Time, right? So they're taking material that's already out there and they're appropriating them for different effect, dramatic effect, right? Shakespeare adds a lot of interesting moral, philosophical, political issues. Marlowe takes the Faustus tale and imbues it with Renaissance, like this idea of like the all-powerful, unbridled individual, right? and eloquence. But Faustus sells his soul to the devil, and he loses his individualism to Satan, to Beelzebub, basically, right? And he gives into a life of sin and a life of licentiousness and a life. He does all of this basically for what seems to be very cheap return, right? Just sort of like these parlor tricks and this like sort of name recognition, but nothing substantial. He's a scholar, and he throws that all away in order to, take on this new kind of this new kind of role in the world, which is sort of very shallow and very, in the grand scheme of things, kind of insignificant. So, what kind of a comment is Marlowe making on individualism, right? How is he working with his classical sources? What is he doing as far as like the theater is concerned? Really pushing some boundaries and pushing some lines. Very interesting questions, but at the end of the day, it seems as if morality, ethics prevails because Marlowe is not Marlowe. Faustus is punished for his sins. Marlowe was also punished for his sins. He was murdered, right? He had committed murder in his youth. He may have been a spy, and he was stabbed through the eye in a bar. Might have been just a fight. Might have been, some sort of a malfeasance, right? Retribution of some kind. Marlowe was accused of being an atheist. He was accused of being a sodomite. He was accused of conspiracies and all sorts of things. He has a very, very colored, checkered past, and we like to read that into his plays, but try as best you can to read Faustus on its own terms, because I think that that is a very rewarding sort of reading. Um, anyway, a little bit longer than my usual, but drama's my thing, so that's what you get. And one thing about tragedy, tragedy consists of the hamartia, right? You may think of it as the tragic flaw, but it's actually the real translation is a tragic mistake. So think about also think about the tragic flaw for Faustus, but what is his tragic mistake? Think about Faustus as tragedy, because that's what Faustus is a tragedy, an Elizabethan tragedy, but a tragedy nonetheless. That's my somewhat long spiel. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thanks.